Have you ever wondered why Big Mama's barbecue ribs are always tender and fall off the bone every single time while yours come out tough, dry, or just missing that something special? She's doing some things that most people would never think to put in a recipe book. And today we are counting down all 31 of her most powerful rib secrets so you can finally cook like the woman who learned from a woman going all the way back. Number 31. Big Mama always starts by pulling the silver skin off the back of the rack. That thin membrane running along the back of the ribs acts like a seal that blocks seasoning from penetrating the meat and causes the ribs to turn tough and chewy no matter how long you cook them. She gets a butter knife, slides it under the edge of that membrane near the end bone, loosens it up, grabs it with a dry paper towel for grip, and pulls it clean off in one long strip. Paper towel is key because wet hands will make that slippery membrane impossible to hold. Once that silver skin is gone, every bit of seasoning and smoke goes directly into the meat instead of bouncing off a rubbery barrier. Number 30. Big Mama rinses her ribs under cold water and then pats them bone dry with paper towels before doing anything else. Now, rinsing meat is actually a practice the USDA advises against for food safety cross-contamination reasons. But in Black households, this has been done for generations as a way to remove any bone fragments, excess blood, and residue from the packaging. After rinsing, she dries them completely because moisture on the surface of the meat creates steam during cooking instead of that beautiful crust and bark that makes ribs irresistible. Dry surface equals better browning and better flavor development. Number 29. She seasons her ribs the night before and lets them sit uncovered in the refrigerator overnight. This is called a dry brine, and it is one of the most powerful moves in barbecue. When the salt in her rub hits the surface of the meat, it draws out a small amount of moisture initially. Then that moisture dissolves the salt and gets pulled back into the meat along with all the other spices. Leaving the ribs uncovered in the fridge allows the surface to dry out slightly, which leads to better bark formation the next day. This step transforms good ribs into extraordinary ribs before they ever touch any heat. Number 28. Big Mama makes her own rub from scratch, and she never uses a pre-made seasoning as the base. Her blend always includes brown sugar, garlic powder, onion powder, smoked paprika, black pepper, cayenne, and her secret weapon, which is a generous amount of Lori's seasoned salt. Lori's has been a staple in black kitchens for decades, and it adds a depth and complexity that plain kosher salt simply cannot replicate. The brown sugar creates caramelization on the surface of the ribs during cooking and helps build that gorgeous mahogany color. She applies the rub generously and presses it firmly into every surface, including the sides and the back, so no inch of meat is left uncoated. Number 27. She adds a light coat of yellow mustard to the ribs before applying her dry rub. Now, here's something important to understand because some people hear mustard and immediately think their ribs are going to taste like a hot dog. They will not. The mustard acts purely as a binder that helps the rub stick to the surface of the meat instead of falling off during cooking. By the time the ribs are done, you cannot taste the mustard at all. What you do get is a thick, well-adhered bark on the outside that holds every bit of that seasoning in place throughout the entire cooking process. This is a trick that competition pitmasters use, and Big Mama figured it out on her own long before it was trendy. Number 26. Before Big Mama puts ribs in the oven or on the grill, she always wraps them tightly in plastic wrap after seasoning and lets them sit at room temperature for about 45 minutes to an hour. Taking cold ribs straight from the refrigerator and putting them directly into a hot cooking environment causes uneven cooking because the outside overcooks before the inside has a chance to catch up. Bringing them closer to room temperature first allows for more even heat penetration from the start, which means more consistently tender meat throughout the entire rack rather than tough spots near the bone. Number 25. Big Mama cooks her ribs at a low temperature for a long time instead of rushing the process. In the oven, she goes no higher than 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and she often goes as low as 250 degrees. This low and slow method gives the collagen inside the connective tissue time to break down and convert into gelatin, which is what creates that silky, rich, sticky, fall-off-the-bone quality that makes people close their eyes when they take a bite. Rushing ribs at 350 or higher causes the meat fibers to seize up and tighten, squeezing out moisture and leaving you with dry, chewy, disappointing results every single time. Number 24, she puts a small pan of water or apple juice on the bottom rack of the oven when cooking ribs indoors. This creates a humid cooking environment inside the oven, which keeps the outer surface of the ribs from drying out during those long, low temperature cooking sessions. When ribs cook in a dry oven environment, the surface can get overly tough before the interior has finished breaking down. The steam from that pan of liquid keeps everything moist and tender throughout the entire cook. Many people skip this step and then wonder why their oven ribs come out drier than they expected. Number 23. Big Mama always cooks her ribs bones side down when starting the cook, and she never flips them until the very end. The bones act as a natural insulator and shield that protects the meat from direct heat. When you cook ribs meat side down from the start, you're exposing the most delicate part of the rib directly to the harshest heat, which toughens the meat prematurely. Bone side down allows the heat to work through the bones first and gently radiate up into the meat from below, while the top of the rack cooks more gently from the ambient heat of the oven or grill environment. Number 22. She wraps her ribs in aluminum foil after the first 2 hours of cooking. This is what professional pitmasters call the Texas crutch, and Big Mama has been doing her version of it forever without ever knowing its official name. When you wrap ribs tightly in foil during the latter portion of cooking, you trap all the steam and juices that have been releasing from the meat and force them back into the rib itself. The ribs essentially braise in their own juices inside that foil package. This accelerates the breakdown of tough connective tissue and ensures that final tender result that makes the meat pull cleanly away from the bone. Number 21. Before wrapping those ribs in foil, Big Mama adds a splash of liquid inside the foil package. Her go-to choices are apple juice, pineapple juice, or a mixture of both because the natural sugars and mild acidity in fruit juice add sweetness that complements pork beautifully while also helping tenderize the meat from the outside. Some grandmas in the community use a splash of cola or even a little bit of beer because both contain compounds that react with the meat proteins during the long braise inside that foil, contributing to tenderness and a subtle complexity in the flavor profile. Number 20. Big Mama uses St. Louis-style ribs rather than baby back ribs most of the time. St. Louis-style ribs come from the belly of the pig, and they have more fat marbled through the meat compared to baby back ribs, which come from higher up near the spine. Fat is flavor and fat is moisture. As those ribs cook low and slow, all that intramuscular fat slowly renders down and bastes the meat from the inside out continuously throughout the cooking process. Baby back ribs can absolutely be done well, but they require much more attention because they have less natural fat to keep them moist during that long cook. Number 19. She saves the liquid that collects in the foil after unwrapping the ribs and uses it to baste the ribs during the final stage of cooking. That liquid is liquid gold. It is packed with concentrated flavor from the rendered fat, the spices, and the meat juices that have been cooking and melding together for hours. Using a brush or a spoon, Big Mama coats the ribs with that collected liquid before the final blast of heat, and it adds an extra layer of rich, complex flavor to the outside of the rack that no store-bought sauce can replicate on its own. Nothing gets wasted in Big Mama's kitchen. Number 18. Big Mama adds a layer of sliced onions underneath the ribs when cooking them in the oven. She places the onions directly on the bottom of the roasting pan and then lays the ribs on top of them. As the onions cook, they release moisture that steams up into the ribs from below, and the flavor from those caramelizing onions infuses the bottom of the rack throughout the entire long cooking process. The onions also keep the ribs elevated slightly off the direct surface of the pan so the underside doesn't sit in any pooling liquid and get waterlogged instead of developing proper texture. Number 17. She uses a piece of aluminum foil to tent the ribs loosely during the first half of cooking instead of wrapping them completely. This is different from the tight foil wrap described earlier. A loose tent traps some heat and some steam around the ribs without fully sealing them, which allows some evaporation to occur while still maintaining a moister cooking environment than completely uncovered ribs would experience. This technique is especially useful when Big Mama is cooking at a church potluck or family reunion in an unfamiliar oven, because it gives her more control over how the ribs develop during that initial cooking phase. Number 16. Big Mama marinates her ribs in a mixture that always includes something acidic alongside her seasoning. Her preferred acidic ingredients are white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, or sometimes a can of pineapple juice. Acid breaks down the protein structure in the outer layers of the meat before cooking even begins, which gives the seasoning a head start on penetrating deeper into the muscle fibers. Apple cider vinegar in particular has been a staple in black southern cooking for over a century, and it contributes a tangy brightness to the finished flavor that balances the richness of the pork fat beautifully. Number 15. She never skips the rest period after cooking. When Big Mama pulls those ribs out of the oven or off the grill, she wraps them in fresh foil and lets them rest for at least 15 to 20 minutes before cutting or serving. During cooking, the muscle fibers contract and push all the internal juices toward the center of the meat. If you cut into ribs immediately after cooking, all those juices rush out and pool on your cutting board instead of staying in the meat where they belong. Resting allows those muscle fibers to relax and reabsorb that moisture, which means every single bite stays juicy instead of dry. Number 14. Big Mama applies her barbecue sauce in layers during the last 20 to 30 minutes of cooking rather than all at once. She brushes on a thin coat, lets it set and caramelize for about 10 minutes, then brushes on another thin coat and repeats. This layering technique builds a thick, sticky, glossy, deeply flavored glaze on the outside of the ribs rather than a single thin coating of sauce that just sits on top. Each layer of sauce caramelizes slightly before the next layer goes on, creating incredible depth of flavor and that beautiful lacquered appearance that makes people reach for their phones before they even pick up a rib. Number 13. She makes her own barbecue sauce, and it always starts with a ketchup base to which she adds brown sugar, molasses, apple cider vinegar, hot sauce, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and smoked paprika. The molasses is the critical ingredient that separates Big Mama sauce from anything store-bought. Molasses adds a deep, dark, bittersweet richness that creates complex flavor and contributes to the beautiful dark color of her sauce. It also helps the sauce cling to the surface of the ribs rather than dripping off, which means more flavor stays on the meat instead of falling into the bottom of the pan. Number 12. Big Mama adds a small amount of liquid smoke to her oven-cooked ribs to replicate the outdoor smokiness that a charcoal or wood fire provides. Liquid smoke is a real product made by capturing actual smoke and condensing it into liquid form, and a little bit goes an incredibly long way. She uses no more than a teaspoon per rack because too much liquid smoke creates an artificial chemical-tasting result that overwhelms the meat. A small amount worked into the rub or added to the foil wrap liquid gives oven ribs that subtle smoky depth that makes people think she's been standing over a grill in the backyard all day. Number 11. She cooks outdoors on a charcoal grill using indirect heat rather than placing the ribs directly over the flames when weather and occasion permit. Big Mama never puts ribs over direct flame because that would char the outside before the inside had any chance to become tender. She piles her charcoal on one side of the grill and places the ribs on the opposite side, creating an indirect cooking zone where the heat circulates around the meat like a convection oven. She also places a pan of water or apple juice on the charcoal side to generate steam that flows over the ribs continuously during the entire cook. Number 10. Big Mama adds chunks of wood to her charcoal fire to create real smoke flavor outdoors. Her preferred woods are hickory and cherry wood. Hickory produces a strong, bold, classic barbecue smoke that stands up to the richness of pork ribs without being delicate or mild. Cherry wood adds a slightly sweet, fruity smoke that complements pork particularly well and contributes a gorgeous deep reddish mahogany color to the bark and the meat. She never uses wood chips alone because they burn too fast. Chunks are the move because they smolder slowly and produce steady, consistent smoke throughout the long cooking process. Number 9. She checks for doneness, not with a thermometer, but by using the bend test. Big Mama picks up the rack with tongs right in the middle and observes how it bends. When properly cooked, ribs will bend dramatically and the bark on the surface will crack and fissure slightly in the middle. She also watches for the meat to pull back from the ends of the bones by about a quarter inch. That bone exposure tells her that the collagen and connective tissue inside the meat has fully broken down and converted to gelatin. She has been reading these visual cues for decades, and she reads them more accurately than most digital thermometers. Number 8. Big Mama boils her ribs briefly before finishing them on the grill or in the oven, and this is genuinely controversial in the barbecue world, but she does not care one bit. She simmers the ribs in heavily seasoned water with onions, garlic, and a splash of apple cider vinegar for about 30 to 45 minutes before finishing them. This pre-cooking step rapidly breaks down connective tissue and dramatically shortens the finishing cook time while ensuring the interior is always tender. Some purists will argue this washes out flavor, but Big Mama argues that her ribs are the ones disappearing off the table first at every cookout and family reunion and Sunday dinner. So the conversation ends right there. Number 7. She seasons her boiling water as aggressively as she would season any soup or broth. Big Mama's boiling liquid for ribs includes onion halves, smashed garlic cloves, bay leaves, black peppercorns, apple cider vinegar, Lorry's, and sometimes a splash of liquid smoke. Since the meat will absorb flavors from that braising liquid as it simmers, the more flavorful the liquid is, the more flavor ends up inside the rib meat itself. Boiling in plain salted water is a waste of an opportunity to build flavor from the very first stage of cooking. Every step in Big Mama's process is intentional and nothing is done halfway. Number 6. Big Mama cuts her rack into smaller sections of 3 or 4 ribs before cooking rather than cooking the whole rack as one piece. This increases the amount of surface area that gets direct exposure to the seasoning rub, the smoke, and the heat. More exposed surface means more bark formation, more caramelization, more smoke penetration, and more overall flavor on every bite. Cutting into smaller sections also makes the ribs easier to arrange in whatever vessel she's using, allows them to cook more evenly without overcrowded conditions, and makes serving at family gatherings significantly easier when everyone is reaching across Mama's good tablecloth to grab their portion. Number 5. She applies a second round of dry rub to the ribs after they come out of the foil wrap and before the final uncovered finishing phase. After hours of cooking inside that foil package, some of the original rub has been absorbed into the meat or washed away by the cooking juices. Adding a light second application of rub before that final uncovered phase in the oven or on the grill gives the surface a fresh hit of seasoning that crisps up beautifully during those last 20 to 30 minutes of heat exposure. This is the step that builds that second layer of bark that makes Big Mama's ribs look as incredible as they taste. Number 4. Big Mama stores leftover ribs properly so that they reheat just as well as they came out of the oven the first time. She wraps individual portions tightly in foil and then places them in Ziploc bags from which she squeezes out as much air as possible before sealing. When reheating, she does not use the microwave because that causes the meat to dry out and toughen rapidly. Instead, she reheats wrapped ribs in a 300-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. The foil traps the residual moisture and the gentle oven heat warms the ribs through evenly without destroying the texture that took hours of careful cooking to develop in the first place. Number 3. She adds a small amount of butter inside the foil wrap along with the liquid when sealing the ribs for that braising phase. About a tablespoon of unsalted butter per half rack is all it takes. As the butter melts and mixes with the rendered pork fat, the fruit juice, and the spices inside that sealed foil package, it creates a rich, silky braising sauce that coats every surface of the meat as it cooks. Butter contains milk solids that contribute a subtle nutty richness and helps the overall sauce become more cohesive. This is the kind of technique that gets passed down through whispers and watching, not written recipes, which is exactly how Big Mama learned it. Number 2. Big Mama finishes her ribs under the broiler for the last 2 to 3 minutes after applying the final coat of sauce. This is the move that makes her ribs look like they just came off a competition barbecue rig with that gorgeous caramelized, almost charred, bubbling glaze. The broiler hits the sauce with intense direct top heat in a very short amount of time, which caramelizes all those sugars in the sauce and creates millions of tiny Maillard reaction browning spots across the surface. She watches the broiler like a hawk because there is only about a 60-second window between perfectly caramelized and burned. Big Mama has never once missed that window in her life. Number 1. The number one trick that Big Mama has been using longer than anyone in the family can remember is this. She cooks her ribs twice. The first day she does the entire low and slow cook, including the foil wrap and the initial sauce application, but she stops just short of that final finish. She lets the ribs cool completely and then refrigerates them overnight. The next day she pulls them out, applies a fresh coat of sauce, and finishes them in a hot oven or on the grill. This 2-day process allows all the flavors from the rub, the smoke, the braising liquid, and the sauce to fully meld and deepen overnight in the refrigerator. The collagen that converted to gelatin during the first day of cooking firms back up slightly during refrigeration, and then when it reheats the next day, it becomes even more silky and rich than it was before. The ribs also become incredibly easy to handle and portion for serving because they hold their shape perfectly when cold. This is the real reason Big Mama's ribs at the 4th of July cookout, the family reunion, the church anniversary dinner, and every holiday table are on another level entirely compared to ribs that were cooked and served same day. Now, here's the real question for the comments section below. Which one of these tricks did your grandmother use that nobody outside your family ever talks about?